Hello and welcome to episode 17 of series 2 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're a returning listener, thank you for your loyalty. Thank you for listening to the show, and thank you for the feedback that you've been sending through to us. We're always looking for new ideas for new interview guests or interview topics, so please let us know if you have any ideas. You can go to our website at www.engagingic.com and leave us some feedback there or some ideas or tips about what you'd like us to cover in future episodes. On that note, in a couple of weeks' time, I have an interview with Paula Leach from Vantage Points. Paula is going to be telling us all about how we can lead employee engagement within our organization and how we can coach and support our leaders to be more effective in helping us to drive our employee engagement agenda. And then 2 weeks after that, so in 4 weeks' time, I have an interview with Farah Ekaroth from EY, who is going to be telling us all about the work that they've been doing around employer branding, which has a very strong connection to employee engagement and to the whole employee experience, including employee communications. And that is also our anniversary episode. Believe it or not, that's a year since we launched the Engaging IC podcast. So it's great that we've managed to keep going for a year. And as you probably know, if you've listened to previous episodes, it started out as a lockdown experiment, a lockdown initiative, but we've kept it going, and I really love making these programs and these podcasts, and I hope you enjoy listening to them, and I hope you enjoy the interviewees who we are able to bring to you. So that's on the 22nd of June that's going to be going out. That's our anniversary 1 year special. And one other thing that I just wanted to make you aware of is that we are running another of our free webinars. These have been pretty popular in the past, and we've talked about them on the show. So just to make you aware of them, we are running another one on the 17th of June, which you can sign up for now via our website. So if you go to thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, and if you have a look on the menu bar, you'll see there's the events tab there. If you click on that, the first event that you'll come to is the 17th of June. And this event may seem a bit of a strange one for this audience, but it's been popular with our listeners in the past, and then we've had listeners who've come along to it. And it's basically what we're going to be looking at is how can we transform our communication and training, particularly around health and safety. What we've found from our experience and our research is that a lot of current ways that health and safety issues are communicated and trained in organizations is sometimes lacks a little bit of creativity, and it's done in a way that's really around getting people through, ticking the boxes. Sometimes it can be an issue, and just getting people to complete the workshop or the training or to go through the communication process. We've come up with a way of doing that in a more engaging way, which but we're going to be talking about the principles behind that and also some of the tools that we've used, and I think you could equally apply them to not necessarily to health and safety, but to other agendas where there is a sort of an element of compliance that needs to be fulfilled. So even if you're not looking at health and safety at the moment, but maybe you're looking at something that you're rolling out as an organizational initiative where there's a danger that it might be just seen as a sort of a death by PowerPoint or a kind of compliance-based rollout, then maybe this is something that you might want to come along to. So that's on the 17th of June 2021. It's at 3 p.m. UK time. It's totally free, and as I said, you can book for that via our website, which is thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. And if you go to our events tab, it's the first event on there. You can get some more information about it, or you can book straight away. It's a Zoom webinar. So that's everything that we've got coming up in the next few weeks. I think now is the time to go on to today's interview. Since starting the Engaging Internal Comms podcast last year in 2020, I've been wanting to actually think about or discuss with someone the opportunities that podcasting presents as an internal communications and engagement medium. I think podcasting and podcasts are a fantastic way of getting our messages out to people in a different way, using a different channel. Then, notwithstanding the fact that podcasting also has its own limitations as well. So what I really wanted to explore today with someone who is a real expert in podcasting, the medium, and also the technicalities of setting up and starting a podcast, was really where do we get started, and why should we be considering and even thinking about having an internal podcast within our organizations? And if we do, what materials, equipment, and planning do we need to put into that? But then once that's up and running, what are some of the things that we need to do in order to grow the listenership of that podcast and turn it into a channel that is used widely across the organization? And that's what I'm going to be exploring with today's interviewee. So my interviewee today is Matthew Mclean. Matthew enjoys working in sound design and audio production, and also has a background in audio drama. He is also someone who likes to help people master the craft of podcasting, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Matthew actually co-presents Podcraft, which is a podcast that teaches listeners the entire art of podcasting, from launching your show to growing a legion of fanatical fans. Matthew describes himself as someone who is always learning and is pals with rabbits. So, good afternoon, Matthew. How are you?
Hi, Craig. I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I know where you're based, but just for the listener, whereabouts in the world are you today?
Dundee, so on the east of Scotland. So an hour north of Edinburgh, I guess, is the one that I tell American people, because just Scottish geography and all that.
Yeah, and how far north of London, which is the other question some usually get, isn't it? So yeah, Edinburgh or London are the usual reference points when we're talking to people particularly on the other side of the pond anyway. So tell us a little bit about what you do, Matthew. I mean, I know, because I'll explain a little bit in a moment to the listener about how we've come across each other, but tell us a little bit about what your work and your experience, particularly kind of in the podcasting space.
Sure, yeah. So I work for a company called The Podcast Host, and we're basically a podcasting hub online that's been around for the past 10 years. I've been with the company for the past 5 or so years now. So Colin Gray, he's the founder basically started the business just as a website, doing a lot of how-to content about podcasting. And about sort of 2014-15, I met Colin at an event down in Birmingham. So it turned out that we weren't too far away from each other geographically. And we just got talking in the bar and kept in touch. So as Colin sort of built the business, there became an opportunity for me to start doing some part-time work. At the time, he was taking on clients to do podcast editing work. So I was doing a lot of audio drama podcasting at the time. And, I was into my production, and it made sense to come on board and start doing some of that work, and that led to doing some articles at an early stage, and it just kind of picked up. The business has done all sorts of different things, tried all sorts of different ventures in that time. I've been a bit of a general, what's the term, jack of all trades, master of none, something like that. That's kind of what my role's been, but done a wee bit of everything. And at the moment, the site does well. My job predominantly at the moment is just keeping on top of the content, so doing a bit of writing and getting other folks to do some articles as well. And then on the sort of other wing of the business is Alitu, which is a podcast maker app. I can't claim any credit for that. The folks that work on that are a lot more clever than I am, but it's a very fancy wee app that cleans up your recordings, produces your podcast for you essentially, and you can upload it through there as well. So that's a really good wee product that we've got. It's doing very well, and like I say, I can't take any credit for that myself.
Yeah, and this very podcast is edited on that. So yeah, it's a great tool, particularly if you're not a technical expert when it comes to audio. But that's brilliant, Matthew. So I mean, if it wasn't for Podcraft we wouldn't. Well, we could be having this conversation, but nobody would hear it because I wouldn't have a podcast. So it's been really instrumental in helping me get set up, and it's been a brilliant resource. So and that's kind of how I
I found you, and I'll openly admit I've been kind of stalking you for the last year and a half, or sort of year or so, trying to get you to come on, because this is a topic I've wanted to talk about for a while. And I know I know kind of the podcast host and Podcraft, the podcast, your podcast is kind of mainly geared towards kind of independent podcasters. I'm really interested in audio as a medium for corporate communicators, which is the kind of people who listen to this show. It's the corporate communicators, people who want to engage people who work in big organizations and just want to get messages to them, and also want to kind of give them a flavor for what the organization is doing and the role that they play in there. So I think it's a tremendous medium. But I guess before we kind of make that assumption that everybody else agrees with us, I mean, why from your perspective, you've been involved in audio for a long time now. Why what are some of the pros of audio as a medium when it comes to communication, and compared with written media, with video, all of the different options that we have when it comes to communication?
I think one of the key areas is attention and engagement, because people are so fatigued with the bombardment of information that they experience on a daily basis, be that from their employers or be that just from their maybe bad habits on their phones all day, looking at social media, looking at news, looking at all the different news feeds. So to ask somebody to engage with something by sitting down and looking at it is tricky, because there's a lot of things competing for their attention there. If you're maybe wanting to communicate with a group of people, if that's maybe your staff or your students or whatever, your organisation, and you're sending out lengthy emails to them, it's going to be quite hard to get them to read them, certainly to read the whole thing and digest it, because people's attentions are so split, they're so divided. When you look at the sort of visual aspect to that. Whereas podcast, on the other hand, you can take it away and you can listen to it when you're doing other things. So it's quite productive and it's quite effective that way. You can be doing dishes, you can be doing the garden, you can be walking the dog, and you can be consuming content in a lot more engaging way than maybe just like firing up an email and reading that. So I think that's why it's so effective, because you're not asking somebody to just sit and read through something. If I always say to somebody, if you want to do a podcast for like employees or that, don't just say to them like, listen to this in your spare time. What I would say to people is take half an hour, 45 minutes out your day, go and have a walk, or get on with something in the house that you need to do, deal with your washing or whatever, cook the tea, and listen to this. And that means you're on the clock, you're being paid, but you can also take advantage of that and get some exercise or get on with some household chores and just let the podcast run away in the background and soak in the information that way. So I think that's really good. I think it's really positive. I think it's a win-win for everyone, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me that's a huge benefit, because you can multitask while you're doing it, which you can't do. You can't go for a run. Well, you could go for a run and watch a YouTube video. You'd probably have a bad accident, but I mean that's where I consume my podcast, when I'm out walking or running. And for me, it's a kind of the duality of exercise, my body and my brain at the same time. It's really efficient. So I think that side of it is really, really, really good. And I think there's also, for me, and I'm sure you agree with this, and I think I've heard you talk about it before on your show, which is around the kind of intimacy of podcasting. I think there's this, very rarely would you be able to command, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, even 45 minutes, up to an hour of someone's attention, and have that intimacy actually literally being in their head for that long. What does it take? 5 minutes to read an average blog, and, videos are normally sort of anything beyond sort of 3 or 4 minutes, people get bored with and distracted. But because you've got that element of being able to do other things while you're listening to it, you can almost ask for a little bit more time with people. I guess that's your experience as well.
Yeah, that's why it's longer form content, because you've I mean, I know people maybe take the mickey with this a bit and go on a bit. You do get some very, very long podcast episodes where you question if it really needed to be that long, but in general you've got a lot more time with the listener than you would if you're doing a YouTube video, so I'm one of these people that if I need to learn how to do anything, I go on YouTube And I'm always amazed that, you get these really helpful videos and the top comment's always like, video starts in 6 seconds, because the presenter of the videos had the sheer audacity to maybe, tell you the URL of his website or something like that, and people have taken umbrage at that, because how dare he take so long to get to the content. So you've got a bit more time. I think podcast listeners are a bit more forgiving, but again, don't obviously push your luck with that.
No. I think the longest I've not actually listened to it in one go, but I've got one on my phone at the minute, which is a 3-hour one, and you kind of think that's really ambitious to think so. And I've heard of kind of well respected, well known podcasters who have shows of that sort of duration, and there's no way you're going to listen to it in one, unless you are doing something. I guess if you're driving or got a long drive, you might listen to the whole show. But yeah, I think it's a big ask. I mean, in terms of, I guess that's the upside. Is there anything that if I'm thinking, okay, that sounds interesting. What are there any things that I might need to think about in terms of my audience, and it might not be the right medium for my organization? I think I overheard you guys talking on one of your shows, I believe it was anyway, where you were talking about, if I was to start a podcast for plumbers, stereotypically plumbers might not be someone who might typically indulge themselves in podcasts. And I guess there's a kind of a demographic thing, but also an education thing around, helping people to understand how to use or how to listen to a podcast even. I mean, what's your experiences and thoughts around that, about making sure it is the right medium for your people?
Well, I suppose, again, I've kind of touched on this already. I think if you don't put barriers in people's way. So initially I was saying about make sure that you're giving people the opportunity to listen to your podcast in their work time, rather than asking them just to listen to it in their downtime. Because then you're not going to get, even if people are quite interested and quite bought into that sort of thing, it's quite out of order if you say to them, spend your evenings listening to me talk to you as your boss or whatever. So you'll get a lot more buy-in if you present it as basically a win-win. Like I was saying, go and take a walk, go and get your shopping, do something useful, but listen to this podcast at the same time. And then again, all companies are different, all industries are different. You might experience pushback depending on what line of work you're in, and people have got an incredible habit sometimes when you're saying to them, this is a really good idea, here's what we want to do, you'll always get somebody who manages to find reasons why that's not going to work for them. It might be, well, I don't have an iPhone, or I've got bad hearing, I'm not going to sit with headphones in. So you maybe get that one negative person. We've all met folk like that. To be honest, I'm like that. but yeah, I think you maybe just have to accept in those early days, maybe we won't get 100% uptake on this, but we could aim for 80 or 90 maybe, and that would be good enough. And I guess one of the other challenges at the moment is that a lot of the times where people would probably typically listen to podcasts, commuting and commuting, I guess, is the main one, or go to the gym and that sort of things. Currently at this state of where we are in 2021, people aren't doing that. So that's another kind of, I guess, again, we've just got to be mindful of when people do consume. I mean, I still think, as I said, I've still found ways to listen to podcasts, even though I don't drive anywhere anymore. So I want to move on. I want to move on really kind of some more practical questions of you, and I guess the questions that you guys typically get asked, which is, what sort of microphone do I need? And but yeah, and I guess from a corporate perspective, that's slightly different, because when it's your own money, you kind of not that you if you're in a corporate, that you're not going to be kind of throwing money left, right, and center, but maybe when it's your own money and you're setting up your own podcast, you want to be kind of as cost effective as possible, but also you might also overindulge because of the ego thing and want to have all the best gear. But I guess gear is only part of it, and I know this is probably far too much that we can cover in a short interview like this, and we might need to put some links to some of your resources on your website. But if I'm thinking of starting a podcast, where do I even start? What do I need to be thinking about first if I'm going to kick a podcast off? Yeah, before gear, before software tools, anything like that, you'd want to have a wee think to yourself of, why is this going to be something that's interesting and useful to the people that I want to reach. And that it doesn't matter if it's a private podcast for a handful of people or a podcast that, you might think there are potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of listeners. Good luck getting that. But, the same rules apply. Why is this interesting and useful to these people that I want to reach? Why do I want to reach them? What do I want them to do with the information? So you answer these questions early doors. You kind of build a foundation around your show. Once you've got answers to those questions, the rest is just semantics. What do I talk into? How do I plug it in? Where do I upload it? They're simple things. The difficult thing is, am I creating this thing of value? Does it matter? Are people going to find it useful and enjoy it? And am I going to be able to turn up consistently and keep the thing going as well? That's another question.
Yeah. I know one of the things I struggled with early on, which is exactly that point you talked about there, Matthew, which is, I knew I wanted to do a podcast. I knew I had something to say, but actually structuring it around, giving it some structure and thinking about, okay, I can probably get away with episode 1 and 2, but what am I going to talk about in episode 3? And is there a connection between them, or are they individual discrete episodes? And where am I taking, the people who are going to be listening to it? And ultimately, what do I want them to do as a result of it? And I mean, I guess people, listening to this who are internal communicators will be used to that kind of, designing. One of the things that internal communicators always talk about is, what do I want people to think, feel, and do differently after they've interacted with whatever it is, whether it's, whatever kind of campaign that I'm running. And I guess it's no different with podcasting, but you've got to probably factor in some of those subtleties that we talked about earlier, which is, and then this kind of links to something else I was going to say, which is, it's often difficult to get people to follow through on an action when they're listening to a podcast, because they might be out walking the dog or, kind of on the way to the shops or whatever. Whereas, because you've got to try and rely on them remembering to do it when they get back. So I guess it's being mindful of the limitations of what you're going to get people to be able to do, but also, playing to its strengths, which is that kind of intimacy as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, you've made a good point there. It's tricky to, if you've got an episode and you've got a list of things that you want people to do after it, you maybe have to rethink that a wee bit and cut it down into maybe bite-sized episodes, because people will be out there and they'll think, oh, I need to remember that, I need to remember this. But yeah, it's not a very in-your-face medium. That is, it's an upside as well as a downside. But you need to have a good think about that when you're putting your episodes together.
Yeah. And as you said, the gear and the microphones and the setup and all of that sort of stuff, that's, as you say, that's more of the kind of transactional element of it, which is, I'll ask you after we've finished recording to maybe give me a few. I mean, I can probably find them myself, but you might have a few we save me a bit of time by pointing to me a few maybe direct pages or resources that we can send people to and get their hands on for that side of things. And I guess, and this kind of links into my next question, which is, I know, again, from listening to you and the things that you talk about on your podcast, which is one of the key things with making a podcast, turning a podcast into something that is sustainable, which is, I guess, is sort of an oxymoron, because that's exactly what I'm going to talk about, which is being sustainable, which is actually how do we make sure that it turns up on a regular basis? Because I think whether it's external, internal, whatever, it needs to be consistent and needs to be, do what its deliver what its promises, which is to be there delivering content on a regular basis, so it's reliable and I know you rely on it for where I get my stuff. And I know that's a challenge with external podcasters, but again, just from your perspective in terms of consistency and repeatability and that sort of thing, what are some of your tips there, maybe for people who are thinking of starting a podcast internally within their organization?
Yeah, when you talk about the sustainability aspect, it can't be, starting a podcast can't or shouldn't at least be something that you think, we'll just get to this when we get to it. So we do our job throughout the week, and if we get a bit of time here or there that we'll work on the podcast, that might get you 20 to 50 episodes, but it's dubious whether that will keep you going in the long run. And you need to to do it in the long run to get the real benefits from it. Your first 20 to 50 episodes, you're only getting started, really. People maybe don't like to hear that, but it's true. So you need to be serious about doing, maybe a bit of time blocking where you set aside a bit more time than you think you'll need. So if you think you're going to need an hour, maybe give yourself an hour and a half or 2 hours. And this is time that's blocked out for nothing else but working on the podcast. So you're having to think about what your content is, what your next few episodes are, and then what are the jobs that we need to do to work towards getting those episodes. Do we need to arrange with people to record? Do I need to investigate certain things about how I'm going to edit the podcast? Do I need to speak to a freelancer who's going to do some work on the editing for me? So you're just setting that time aside to work on the show, and that's when you do it. It doesn't need to be the same time every week. That's another, I think that's an unnecessary barrier that a lot of people put in their way. But you do want maybe that same block of time every week that you can pencil in when you're doing your weekly plan at the start of the week, and that's going to give you a seriously good crack at doing something that actually keeps going.
Yeah, and again, you've touched upon an important point there, I think, which is you may decide to outsource the production of it. In which case, then your role then is to create the content. And I guess, having never worked with a podcast production company, I guess it's not just a matter of just barreling off a few MP3s and just saying, there you go, put that into a show for me. There still needs to be some thought that goes into that and some structure into that, so they can edit into something coherent.
Yeah, there's Fiverr are a company that I've probably slagged off a fair bit in the past, but we're doing a lot of work back and forward with them now, and there's a lot of, I never slagged them off because of the quality of people on there. I was just a bit suspicious of that whole gig economy thing. I mean,
the kind of commoditization of stuff. Yeah.
But there's very good podcast editors on there at very reasonable prices. We've worked with a few of them. You're talking as low as sort of 30-40 quid per episode for a really good producer. And obviously podcast production, there's different things. Are we talking cleaning it up a bit and making it loud enough? Or are we talking chopping out mistakes or rearranging stuff? So that's all down to yourself and the freelancer or the service you're using. You need to speak to your producer and find out what the arrangement is. But that's all. If you're going to go down that route, there's a bit of setup time involved. There's obviously a wee bit of monetary costs involved as well. But you probably don't want to be doing stuff like that, especially if you're running a company. That's not the best use of your time. So possibly look at other ways to sort that out.
Yeah, and I guess then there's always there's that way, which is working directly with freelancers, or there's the kind of boutique businesses that will do it all for you. They'll probably even they may in the future allow you to go in and use their studios and record in there. I guess that those options are sort of higher end, where really all you're doing is just speaking, and they're taking it all away and putting it together for you. Or obviously you've got to do the planning ahead of that, but there are more kind of those sorts of options exist as well. Not that I've used them, but.
Yeah, I definitely you will find services like that depending on where you are in the world. If you're in a city, certainly you'll probably find something like that. But in all honesty, you don't need to spend a lot of money to get a good sounding microphone and just do some basic things around your recording area to make it sound pretty good. You're not even talking hundreds of pounds. You're talking maybe £100. So very, very low barrier to entry.
Very low barrier, yeah. And in terms, I mean, I guess this is a difficult one for you to answer, Matthew, but I'll ask anyway. I mean, I guess the other thought around is who presents the show. Wouldn't it be great if we could get the chief exec to maybe do a kind of 5-minute slot, or even be the host or co-host, perhaps, or some of the other senior people within the business. But I guess that sort of tone of voice. Although I'm kind of thinking. I'm picking up a lot more people are more comfortable broadcasting, given the fact that that's what they've been doing for the last year, most of them anyway. And there's a kind of authenticity that I'm picking up from people who would normally have been quite inaccessible or being seen to be sort of a bit on a pedestal. So I don't know whether that, in terms of your experience, I don't know if you had any experience of who should we be looking at to host our internal company podcast? Should we be looking at the kind of natural presenter, or should we be trying to get some of the more kind of senior people? But then do we run the risk of it being a bit kind of stuffy and corporate? I don't know. It's a sort of bit of a strange question. Sorry, a bit of a rhetorical question, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's as you're alluding to there's no right answer here. Whether a person's going to be boring, I don't think is entirely relevant to what job they do in the company. So you might get somebody that does a pretty interesting job, and they might still not do a very good job of presenting the show. Somebody that's in charge, they might be great, they might be terrible. I would say you probably want to get the boss or bosses involved at least. So have the odd episode where you maybe get them on and chat to them about something. I think that would be a positive thing for people, because it, if they were never involved, it might suggest to the employees like, oh well, they're above this, and therefore it's worth less, and I might not bother listening to it. I think you might start to get that attitude towards it. So every company's going to be different. You're all going to have different staff, and some people in the staff are going to be absolute naturals. A lot of people are going to think that they're naturals, and they're probably not. So it's not easy.
Not one size fits all.
Unfortunately, not any advice I could really give on that front.
No, that's fine. And I guess again, the I guess leading towards the end of the conversation is the idea that ultimately we want to launch it. If we're going to do this, we want to launch it, but then we want more and more people within the organization. You said earlier, I think it's and I know this from my own experience, it's a slow burn. It's not you're not an overnight success with a podcast. In that medium, you've got to kind of be patient and grow organically. There's a lot of organic growth goes on. I guess, looking at from an internal perspective, what are some of the metrics that organizations might be wanting to use, but also in terms of growing that listenership? What are some of the tips that you might have that could help organizations with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously your simple numbers are always a reasonable gauge. You're looking at how many people have access to this podcast versus how many people are listening to it. And then you might also look at because each episode's going to have a particular purpose. And at the end of it, there might be something that you want them to do, whether it's, sign up to this training event, or we need some volunteers to organise this or that. It could be anything, again, very dependent on your organisation. But starting to look at, okay, what percentage of people are actually coming forward and responding to these things. And if it's low, again, it's impossible to give a good or bad number, really. But if you're thinking to yourself, this is very low, you need to probably sit down with the folks that are running the podcast with you and say, okay, why is that? Is there something we need to do differently here? You might start to approach people who do listen to the show and just ask them for their feedback, brutally honest feedback. What do you like about the show? What are you maybe not so keen on? And what would you like to hear in the future? How could we make this better for you, more effective for you? So it's always going to be a work in progress. It's the same with any podcast, private or otherwise. The show that you launch on episode 1, you'll have a very good idea in your head of what you want it to do and what you want it to be, but it's going to change. It's going to adapt over time, maybe not drastically, but subtly. It's natural, in life things change and things adapt a wee bit. So I think you have to set your ego aside a wee bit and say, okay, things might have to change a wee bit. We might have to adapt and grow a wee bit, and that's absolutely fine. We're not. It's not like Apple launching a new phone or Microsoft launching a new games console, where the thing they put out, here it is, that's it. It's got to be perfect. The marketing's got to be right. It's got to sell well from day one. A podcast isn't like that. There's very little about a podcast that you can't change over time and tweak.
Yeah, no, a good point, and I think that's it's a good lesson in not just in podcasting, but generally for organisations. Is being prepared to learn by trial and error sometimes and not have it perfect from the start. You just made me think about something there, Matthew, in terms of platforms. But so, I mean, obviously I'm aware as an external podcast, the kind of whole objective is you want as many people to have access to it as possible. But I guess with an internal podcast, that's you want as many people internally, but there might be stuff in there you don't want. So do you use the same platform? Do you have a kind of a media host that you would use for an internal podcast, and you restrict it? Because I'm just wondering, I don't know, it just came to me there. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, there's an increasing number of good media hosts that offer a private podcasting feature these days. So I believe you host with Castos, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, they do. That's fair enough. They do actually. They've been trying to sell that to me as an option. So yeah.
So it looks like their $19 tier looks like you'll get a private podcast feed on that. They put a limit on private subscribers, which starts at 100. So not many companies are going to have more folks than that. Well, I don't know. Maybe a lot of companies do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So Captivate as well. Captivate are a really good media host there. The same price, $19 a month. They're 150 folk that it starts with.
Yeah.
So
okay.
you're not talking big money. $15 a month.
And I guess if you're running a corporate podcast, you'd be reaching out to these guys to say, look, I've got it's an internal corporate podcast. It will be a 100% private podcast. We don't want anybody outside of our organization being able to listen to it. So there probably are kind of, corporate, options for that sort of thing. Just finally, sorry, go on, Matthew. Yeah.
I was just going to say, they're pretty well locked down, these things. We run one ourselves. I started one at the podcast host. To be honest, I don't put as much work into it as I probably should. Don't lead by example very well, but we're using a host called Transistor. And it's basically we give everyone a link and they click onto that link and it'll get them to sign up. So they'll enter an email address. So then I could see in the back end all the people who've registered. And if I want to, what I can do is I'll only allow people with an at the podcast host email address to access it. So that straight away secures it a fair bit if you've got your own. And then you could change your link every month as well, or I think you could change it as much as you like, to be honest. So you've got a link that people could get it, but if you reckon, it's for some weird reason other people are listening to it, you could just change that link and people wouldn't be able to find it anymore, even if it's out in the wild. So they do a good job of locking these things down. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Just finally, I mean, I know you've just launched the book, the podcast growth book, which is available on Amazon, and I'm reading through it at the moment, and it's got some great tips there and ideas for growing an external or an independent podcast. I guess some of those sort of techniques and tools in there might apply to an internal corporate podcast as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of the same rules and techniques apply. So even basic things, compelling episode titles are something that a lot of people overlook, and you're going to need that in an internal podcast just as you are in a wide open public podcast. You can't just be coming out and saying episode 2, interview with CEO. Who cares about that, or who sees that and thinks, I really can't wait to dive into this. But if you're letting them know, here's we're pulling the curtain back on this thing, and people are like, I can't wait to hear this. So
episode 2,
like
why we don't. Yeah, episode 2, why we don't pay you anything, or why we're going to stop paying you. That would definitely get a lot of downloads, wouldn't it? I think in terms
why
of
we didn't top up your furlough wages.
Oh dear, yeah, we better stop there. I mean, we can put these in the show notes, Matthew. Any? I'm just thinking, any particular episodes of Podcraft, because how long's Podcraft been going now? It must be getting on for 8 or 9 years, or longer than that.
Yeah, I think Colin put the early episodes out in 2013, which was before my time. But and it's
while you're still a boy. Yeah.
The good thing about Podcraft is we find. Sorry, I thought you said something there, Craig.
No. Sorry, Matthew. No. Yeah.
Aye. So what I was going to say was the good thing is it's seasonal. So it's kind of organised into seasons, rather than this week we're talking about best microphones, next week we're talking about how to interview. It's not really like that. It's more, season one gives you, well, we call it season one. We re-recorded it as season 10, but those are the very basic things that you need to consider when you're starting up. And then we go through, we've got a full season on monetization, we've got a full season on equipment, we've got a full season on even things like creating highly produced podcasts. So the latest season that we're doing now is all about growth, because it's kind of promoting the podcast growth book that you talked about there. But we're basically, each episode, we're taking a really useful task and just talking through it. So it's not like we're just doing an episode saying, buy the book. Because that'd be a short and boring episode, but
no, and it is. I mean, it is a great. That's why I love the way you've structured your podcast and also your website is great in terms of just you can just find what it is you need at that moment. Like you say, you don't have to kind of wade through loads of stuff. It kind of says what it does on the tin, which I find really kind of makes it really useful. And so some of the bits are, like you said, monetization may or may not be relevant for an internal podcast, but certainly gear and all of the other things, or you can really basically take your pick. So really great resource, and we'll put some links to that. So just finally then, just wrapping up, Matthew, any final sort of tips or thoughts from you to the listener in terms of thinking about getting a podcast off the ground? You think it's a good idea, need to try to sell it into the business, any final sort of tips from you in terms of getting started with that?
Yeah, just don't put big barriers in your way, and don't get stuck trying to create the perfect podcast from episode one. Just accept that you're probably better just to start working on it and launch it. Obviously have the basic questions answered that I talked about at the start of the episode. Why we're doing it, why it's going to be useful and interesting to people. You want to get that nailed down as best you can. But after that, maybe you don't have the best microphone in the world. Maybe you haven't quite figured out the right recording software yet. Maybe you still need to do a bit of work to the room or office that you're going to record in. But don't let that hold you up. You're better to dive in, and you will make a few mistakes, and that's fine. If you're a very, very big company and you do want to come out the gate flying and with a really professional sounding thing, then maybe just look to hire a company to work with you instead. You'll spend a lot of money, but some companies that are very big, they'll be happy to do that. Rather than have something that sounds a bit like it's been learned on the job. So totally up to the company. Yeah.
I remember you your words and Collins and ringing in my ears, which kind of paraphrasing, the worst podcast is the one that never even got started. And I think you're absolutely right. I've learned so much from just getting on with it, and nowhere near perfect, far from it, but yeah, better than kind of kicking myself and thinking, oh, why didn't I start that podcast when I said I was going to do it? So yeah. Look, that's been absolutely fantastic, Matthew. Thank you for that. I will put some links in, and we'll just talk about those maybe just as we wrap up. But finally, before we kind of get on to the kind of final bit, I did forewarn you. I do ask all of my interviewees a question about their about them that some share something with us that even Colin doesn't know. I don't know, but anyone within who your kind of close circle of friends or colleagues that might go, oh, I never even knew that. And we've already disclosed the rabbit thing, so I've kind of taken one of those things away from you. But what is it you'd like to share with a listener in terms of your kind of surprising secret, Matthew?
First, I guess, just to clarify, the rabbit thing is nothing weird. It's just that I have couple of pet rabbits. There's nothing weird or seedy going on there. I don't eat rabbits or anything like that. At the moment, I guess, with me, quite exciting for us at the moment, me and my wife, because she's expecting our daughter. We're going to have a wee girl in the summer. So we're really, really happy about that at the moment. That's pretty exciting for us, especially in the current climate where there's not a lot else going on. Certainly not a lot of positive stuff going on.
No.
But I don't know how interesting that is to your listeners, to be honest.
No,
so I'll give you a wee a wee something else, I suppose. In the first lockdown that we had, I was always out in the garden with the football, and I reckon I got well over 200 keepy uppies one day. So I'm quite good with the old keepy uppies. So that's a talent that I never monetised. Once you put me on a pitch, I'm useless. But if you just leave me with the ball, I could play about with it a wee bit. So
yeah. I'm sort of I can do about 3 keepy uppies, and I'm useless on a pitch as well. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds
halfway
for me.
there, then.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, look, fantastic, Matthew. I did mention, so I'm gonna just off my own back, I'm going to put a link to the podcast host, which is the website where people can find everything from kind of starting, building, whatever their podcast. So again, I think all of that stuff in there is absolutely relevant externally or internally as well as externally. So independent or corporate. I'm going to put the link to the podcast because again, I think, practice what you preach. If you're going to get into podcasting, listen to other people's podcasts, and a great one to start with is Podcraft. And I'm also going to put a link to the book because I think, again, it's a great resource. And I think, I know it's called Podcast Growth, which kind of implies, it's only if I've already got a podcast, but I think you can learn a lot if you start with the end in mind. I think that's not a bad place to start. Anything else you'd like to signpost people to, or to you personally, as how people can maybe contact you and if they want to ask you any questions or get in touch with you directly?
Yeah, I don't really do any social media, anything like that.
I noticed that. Yeah, I was trying to find you on LinkedIn, and I just thought, he's not even on here. Yeah,
I know. I just don't care for it. The minute I'm finished my work, that I put the computer away, and I like to go and do analog things. I would just say, for everything, the podcasthost.com, you'll find it all there. There's a good wee search feature in it. So basically, if you've got any question about anything to do with podcasting, the chances are if you type it in or type a few keywords in there, it will bring up the article on it. A good chance I've written it too. But we've got a lot of writers who are better than me. I'm just maybe the most prolific. Not necessarily the best. But you'll find a lot of good, helpful content there, thepodcasthost.com.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd second that. Well, look, Matthew, thank you very much. Take care. Stay safe. All the best with your did you say it was is it a little girl you say you're having?
Wee girl. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so hopefully she gives me no trouble in my old age, but I dare say it won't be as plain sailing as that.
Well, that's a whole separate story. No, I wish you and your partner all the best, and stay safe. Look after yourself, Matthew, and I'll be listening to you as usual, and maybe at some point we'll be able to catch up as ourselves and have a chat, and maybe even a coffee at some point. Who knows? Yeah,
we'll get a ball out, do some keepy uppy.
Well, it'll be short session that. Take care, mate. All the best.
Thank you, Craig.
Bye. So, thank you for listening to Engaging Internal Comms. Hope you found this episode useful. We'd love to get your feedback and thoughts about the show. So, and also any questions or ideas that you've got for things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. So you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can get in touch with us via the contact form on our website, which is engagingic.com. Also, you'll be able to sign up for our mailing list there, and we'll send you relevant news about the show, new episodes, and also anything that we think you might be interested in when it comes to internal communications or employee engagement. If you like the show and you haven't already done so, please subscribe to it via your podcast service. And also you can subscribe to it via the links on our podcast page, which again is engagingic.com. If you know anyone else who might be interested in the show, please distribute it to them. Please let them know about it. We want to try and grow a community of people here who are contributing to the show, giving us new ideas for episodes and things that you'd like to cover in future. So thank you very much.